The pale blue light from the massive monitor cast an icy glow across Zuri Washington's face, illuminating the sheer, paralyzed shock in her warm brown eyes. Her fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard, frozen mid-keystroke. On the screen, a decrypted master directory was cascading open, revealing thousands of encrypted offshore routing codes, shell company registrations, and black market asset files. Standing by the heavy oak doors, silhouetted against the glittering golden Seoul skyline, was Ryu Ji-hoo. The elite, terrifying billionaire king of the underworld didn't move. His broad shoulders were rigid beneath his tailored charcoal suit, and his sharp, aristocratic facial features were completely locked. For the first time in his life, the Iron Boss's impenetrable, cold composure was entirely shattered by the secret that had just come to light. Zuri had arrived at the luxury estate believing she was just a highly qualified, elite academic tutor hired to help Ji-hoo's brilliant, but rebellious teenage sister pass her data science entrance exams. But the hidden root directory she had just effortlessly bypassed on the family's private study server didn't contain practice curriculums. It contained the entire global financial ledger of the city's most feared shadow syndicate, and her own family's frozen, long-lost estate was listed deep within his historical targets. Welcome back to Annie's Empire of Love, where power is a beautifully dangerous illusion, and the heart plays the highest stakes of all. Today, we are stepping into a story where the slow burn tension is agonizing, the secrets are deep, and the ending, well, the ending will leave you questioning everything. Before we begin this psychological chess match, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and leave a thumbs up on this video. Now, dim your lights, lock your doors, and let's find out what happens when two masterminds collide, but neither knows who is truly holding the board. Let's begin. Before the chaos of the decrypted mainframe, there was only the quiet, desperate grind of survival. Zuri Washington did not have the luxury of making mistakes. At 23, she was a certified data science prodigy, holding an advanced degree in predictive algorithms and structural encryption. But a genius intellect couldn't pay the predatory medical debts her family had been saddled with after her mother passed away. Nor could it stop the corrupt collection agencies currently threatening to seize her family's historic estate in Atlanta. She needed money, she needed it immediately, and she needed a salary that matched her elite, specialized capabilities. When an ultra-exclusive international agency reached out with a private, high-paying placement in Seoul, South Korea, Zuri packed her life into 2 suitcases. The job description was deceptively simple: act as a live and academic mentor and data security tutor for a brilliant but intensely rebellious 16-year-old girl named Ryu Min-ah. The salary was astronomical enough to clear her family's debts in a matter of months. But the true catch wasn't the teenager. It was the teenager's brother and legal guardian. The moment the sleek black town car pulled through the heavily fortified gates of the Ryu estate, nestled deep within the secluded hills of Seongbuk-dong, Zuri felt the shift in atmosphere. The property was a flawless blend of traditional Korean architecture and hyper-modern military-grade security. It wasn't just a home. It was a fortress. She was led through the sprawling, minimalist corridors by a stone-faced house manager who walked with rigid military precision. Zuri, wearing a sharp, tailored corporate blazer and carrying her elite custom workstation, kept her chin high. Her intricate African braids were styled into an immaculate professional crown, her warm brown eyes taking in every security camera and biometric scanner she passed. Her predictive mind was already calculating the encryption strength of the estate's localized network. The house manager stopped abruptly outside a set of massive, floor-to-ceiling sliding doors made of reinforced dark timber. "Mr. Ryu will see you now," the manager stated, his voice devoid of warmth. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he delivered a final, chilling instruction. A word of absolute advice. "Miss Washington, this estate operates under strict boundaries. You are here to tutor young Lady Min-ah in the Western Wing. You will never enter the sub-basement archive. You will never touch the master network switch in the main study. And above all, when Mr. Ryu speaks, you will answer briefly, and you will never look him directly in the eyes. If you break these rules, your contract is terminated instantly, and you will be escorted from the country. Zuri's brow twitched. Never look him in the eyes. She was a woman of absolute confidence and emotional dominance. She didn't bow to intimidation. Before she could voice her disdain for the archaic rule, the doors slid open automatically. The private office was vast, lined with towering bookshelves, and backed by massive glass walls overlooking the distant, shimmering skyline of Seoul. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the dimming twilight, was Ryu Ji-hoo. The breath caught slightly in Zuri's throat. The rumors of the elite billionaire CEO of Ryu Holdings did not do him justice. He was a towering, broad-shouldered Korean man who radiated an immediate, suffocating aura of absolute authority. He wore a flawless, bespoke charcoal suit that accentuated his powerful, athletic frame. As he turned slowly to face her, Zuri noted his razor-sharp, aristocratic features and a jawline that looked as though it were carved from marble. But it was his eyes that truly anchored the room. They were a deep, piercing obsidian, calculating, completely unreadable, and dripping with a chilling dead silence. He was a man who ruled through absolute psychological leverage. Ji-hoo did not step forward. He merely looked down at her from his position of power, his dark eyes instantly evaluating the beautiful black woman who had dared to enter his inner sanctum. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, designed to make any ordinary applicant crumble and lower their gaze. Zuri felt the immense pressure of his alpha energy filling the room. But instead of looking down at the polished floorboards, she squared her shoulders. She tilted her head up, meeting his predatory, pitch-black gaze with an unshakable, brilliant defiance of her own. A microscopic shift occurred in the room. Ji-hoo's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, his cold composure momentarily rippling as this outsider casually shattered his golden rule within the first 10 seconds of her arrival. "You are late, Miss Washington," Ji-hoo spoke. His deep, gravelly baritone vibrated through the quiet room, stripped of all warmth, delivering a cold, commanding warning. "In my empire, time is a currency you cannot afford to waste. Remember your place, adhere strictly to the boundaries of this house, and do not make me regret bringing a variable like you into my world." The western wing of the Ryu estate was a gilded cage of a different sort. For 2 weeks, Zuri poured her energy into her new role. Ryu Min-ah was a whirlwind of teenage defiance, highly intelligent but completely checked out of standard academics. She had purposefully failed 3 successive instructors by tearing down their lesson plans with biting sarcasm. But Zuri wasn't a standard instructor. Instead of forcing Minna to memorize dry coding languages, Zuri gamified the data science curriculum. She showed Minna how to build predictive algorithms to analyze global fashion trends and use structural encryption to create unhackable, private social servers for her friends. Within days, the teenager's hostility completely melted. Zuri's warmth, combined with her commanding, unapologetic confidence, earned her something no one else in the estate possessed: Minna's absolute loyalty. Yet, despite her success, the strict boundaries of the estate felt like a heavy weight. Zuri constantly felt the phantom sensation of being watched. Whenever she crossed the courtyard, she could feel the chilling, razor-sharp gaze of the Iron Boss tracking her from the tinted glass windows of the main study. She strictly abided by the house manager's warnings, steering completely clear of the sub-basement archive and the master server room. Until the night the empire began to bleed from the inside. It was just past 11 p.m. Zuri was in the Western Wing's private kitchen, preparing a cup of calming chamomile tea to soothe a restless mind. The estate was usually dead silent at this hour, but a sudden, frantic rustling from the adjacent corridor caught her attention. Stepping out into the hallway, she spotted Minna. The 16-year-old was clutching a high-end corporate laptop to her chest, her face completely pale and her eyes wide with a manic, hyperventilating terror. "Minna?" Zuri asked softly, stepping forward. "What's wrong? Why aren't you asleep?" "Zuri, I messed up. I messed up so bad," Minna whispered, her voice cracking as a tear slipped down her cheek. She pulled Zuri into the shadow of the alcove, her hands shaking violently as she opened the laptop. I wanted to test the automated firewall override patch we talked about during today's lesson. I tried to route it through a dummy port, but I accidentally hooked into the main corporate server array in my brother's study. I didn't mean to, I swear. Zuri's analytical mind immediately went into overdrive. She looked down at the screen. Her blood ran cold. Min-Ah hadn't just bypassed a standard corporate firewall. Her experimental override had accidentally torn down a highly sensitive, hidden localized proxy. Because the defense grid was down, a massive external phishing terminal was currently draining Ryu Holdings' encrypted intellectual property at a catastrophic rate. Millions of gigabytes of proprietary global data, offshore trade secrets, and core network configurations were hemorrhaging into the dark web. Worse, a localized kill switch had been triggered. The main study doors were locked down, and the house manager's remote override keys were completely frozen. Within 10 minutes, the entire global server network of Ryu Holdings would suffer a total structural collapse, exposing the billionaire's deepest operations to federal regulatory watchdogs. If Hyung finds out, he'll never look at me again, Minna sobbed, completely unraveled. The corporate compliance teams are already alerting the authorities. It's going to ruin him. Zuri looked at the weeping girl, then looked down at the cascading red error logs on the screen. She didn't know anything about the underground underworld. She truly believed Ryuji Hu was just an elite, incredibly strict tech and logistics billionaire facing an unprecedented corporate crisis. She didn't care about the corporate hierarchy, and she certainly didn't care about the house manager's terrifying warnings. Her protective instincts for Min-Ah, combined with her fierce, unshakable intellectual pride, took complete control. "Step aside, Minna," Zuri said, her voice dropping into a calm, lethal register of absolute emotional dominance. She didn't run to the house manager. She didn't wait for Ji-Hoo's elite corporate security team to arrive and panic. Instead, Zuri took the laptop, bypassed the locked corridor, and marched directly toward the main study's secondary maintenance terminal, a small biometric interface hardwired into the wall right outside the forbidden room. Her fingers became a blur of lightning-fast precision over the mechanical keys. She didn't just try to patch the leak, she rewrote the entire defensive perimeter on the fly. Using her own predictive algorithms, Zuri built an ad hoc, multi-layered digital decoy. She systematically fed the external dark web thieves corrupted, fabricated data streams, completely trapping their tracking IP addresses inside an infinite loop of her own design. For 7 intense, breathless minutes, Zuri fought a silent, brilliant war against a faceless corporate predator. Her rich melanin skin glowed under the harsh light of the terminal screen, her intricate braids swaying slightly as she executed code after code with terrifying genius. With a final, devastating keystroke, she executed a master reversal. The external drain completely stopped. The stolen intellectual property was instantly recalled and locked behind a newly forged, unhackable encryption barrier. The cascading red error logs vanished, replaced by a calm, steady green. The structural collapse of the multi-billion-dollar empire had been averted in a single room, by a single woman. The heavy timber doors of the main study suddenly hissed, sliding open automatically as the system reset. Zuri let out a deep, shuddering breath, her heart hammering against her ribs as the adrenaline began to fade. She closed the laptop, turning around to assure Minna that the danger had passed. But Minna wasn't standing there. Ryuji, who was? The Iron Boss stood in the doorway of his inner sanctum, his imposing, broad-shouldered frame casting a long, terrifying shadow over her. He had discarded his suit jacket, his crisp white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the raw, powerful tension in his chest. His razor-sharp features were completely frozen, and his dark, predatory eyes were wide with a profound, paralyzed shock. He had been watching the entire counter-strike happen live from his terminal inside. He had prepared himself to witness the total exposure and ruin of his shadow network. Instead, he had watched an innocent, 23-year-old American tutor single-handedly outmaneuver a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar corporate sabotage attempt in under 10 minutes. Zuri stood her ground, clutching the laptop, her warm brown eyes meeting his stunned obsidian gaze without a single ounce of regret. "The leak is contained, Miss Ryu," Zuri stated calmly, her voice ringing with absolute, fearless confidence. "Your empire is safe." Jihu didn't utter a single word. The silence between them was deafening, but beneath his cold, unreadable mask, a dangerous consuming spark had just been ignited. He stared at her as if she were a ghost, completely unaware that she had just saved the largest mafia shadow network in South Korea from total federal annihilation. The aftermath of the digital breach did not bring the fiery termination or the swift deportation the house manager had threatened. Instead, it brought a heavy, profound stillness that felt far more dangerous. Ryu Jihu did not fire Zuri. In fact, he didn't say a single word to her for 3 days following the incident. But the invisible lines of control within the Seongbuk-dong estate had completely shifted. From the shadows of his private, high-tech command center in the main wing, the Iron Boss became utterly consumed. Before him, a massive bank of high-definition security monitors illuminated the dim room in a pale, sterile glow. Jihu stood motionless, his imposing, broad-shouldered frame clad in a crisp black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the powerful, tensed muscles of his hands. His razor-sharp, aristocratic features were fixed in a mask of intense concentration as his predatory obsidian eyes tracked a single screen. On the monitor, Zuri was sitting in the sunlit courtyard with Min-ah. Her rich melanin skin caught the afternoon light beautifully, and her intricate African braids swayed gently as she threw her head back in a warm, resonant laugh at something the teenager had said. She was completely at ease, radiating a vibrant, defiant warmth that the cold walls of this fortress hadn't seen in over a decade. Jihu stared at her smile, his jaw clenching. He had spent his entire life studying anomalies, threats, and variables. To him, people were equations to be solved or leverage to be used. But Zuri Washington defied every algorithm he possessed. She was entirely innocent of his dark world, yet she possessed a fierce, commanding intellectual brilliance that had effortlessly dismantled a multi-million-dollar syndicate attack. She was a beautiful contradiction, and the mystery of her was driving him into a quiet madness. Sir, the house manager stepped silently into the command center, bowing deeply. He placed a thick, heavily embossed black leather folder onto the sleek marble console. "The deep background check you ordered on the American Tutor," the manager reported, his voice low. "Our intelligence assets in the United States had to bypass 3 federal firewalls to retrieve the unredacted files. Her academic records are flawless, but her family history carries an unusual financial footprint." Jihu didn't look away from the monitor. He merely extended a large, calloused hand and opened the folder. His eyes scanned the decrypted personal data streams, the predictive financial charts, and the legal records of the Washington family estate in Atlanta. As he read the names of the predatory corporate creditors who were currently forcing her family into bankruptcy, a dark, dangerous spark ignited deep within his chest. He recognized the holding companies funding those creditors. They weren't standard American banks. They were front companies belonging to a rival international shipping cartel, the very same syndicate that had attempted to sabotage his corporate servers 3 nights ago. They weren't just targeting him. In a cruel twist of global logistics, they were the ones suffocating her. "Shall I prepare her termination papers, Miss Ryu?" the house manager asked, sensing the dangerous aura radiating from his boss. "She is a significant security risk. She knows too much about our network architecture." "No," Jihu murmured. His deep, gravelly baritone vibrated through the quiet room, laced with a chilling, possessive authority that made the manager instantly freeze. Jihu slowly closed the leather folder, his fingers gripping the edge tightly. He looked back at the monitor, watching Zuri gently place a hand on Minaz's shoulder, guiding the girl through a complex coding problem with infinite patience and grace. "Upgrade her clearance," Jihu commanded coldly. "Quietly route a monthly retention bonus to her account, triple her current salary. Ensure the source is masked through an offshore educational grant. And place a discreet, high-level cybersecurity detail on her family's estate in Atlanta. If a single creditor touches a brick of that property, I want their entire financial infrastructure liquidated by morning. The house manager's eyes widened in sheer, uncharacteristic shock. Sir, that requires routing syndicate capital into a private civilian asset. If the corporate board or federal regulators trace that data trail, then make sure they don't. Jihu cut him off, his voice dropping into a deadly, whisper-quiet register as he stared intensely at Zuri's digital reflection. She protected my empire. I will protect hers. Now, clear out. The manager bowed hurriedly and retreated, leaving the Iron Boss alone in the shadows. Jihu stepped closer to the screen, his fingers brushing against the cold glass where Zuri's image sat. He knew he was crossing a dangerous, irreversible line. He was a creature of the dark, and she belonged in the light. But as he watched her navigate his world with such effortless, majestic confidence, a dark, unyielding obsession took root in his soul. He wasn't going to send her away. He was going to pull her deeper into his orbit, tightening his invisible protection around her, until she had nowhere left to run. As Jihu kept his eyes locked on the monitor, a small, crimson data alert suddenly flashed in the corner of his personal terminal. A hidden, automated protocol inside Zuri's custom workstation had just initiated an unauthorized, deep system query into his private ledger. She wasn't just teaching his sister anymore. She was looking for him, and she was about to cross a line that would change their dynamic forever. The grandfather clock in the grand hallway struck midnight, its heavy, deep chimes echoing through the desolate, pristine corridors of the main wing. Zuri walked with a slow, deliberate pace, her custom high-performance laptop securely tucked under her arm. She had spent the last 5 hours in the Western Wing manually auditing Minna's localized server logs, ensuring that every trace of the accidental security breach was entirely wiped. Minna was safely asleep, but Zuri's mind was wired, buzzing with a restless, hyper-analytical energy. She reached the massive, floor-to-ceiling sliding doors of the main study. According to the house manager's schedule, Ryu Jihu was supposed to be at a global tech symposium in downtown Seoul until sunrise. The wing should have been completely empty. Zuri tapped the biometric sensor, overriding the door lock with her newly upgraded security clearance. The heavy, dark timber doors slid open silently, and she stepped into the pitch-black room. She didn't turn on the overhead lights. Instead, she navigated by the soft, ambient glow of the Seoul skyline bleeding through the massive glass walls. She walked directly toward the executive mahogany desk, intending to plug her laptop into the master network switch to run a final automated diagnostic patch for the estate's firewall. She took 3 steps into the room before she realized she wasn't alone. "You are incredibly bold, Miss Washington," a deep, gravelly baritone rumbled from the darkness. Zuri stopped dead in her tracks, her heart giving a sharp, sudden thud against her ribs. She didn't flinch, and she didn't step back. She slowly turned her head toward the far corner of the vast room. Sitting in a high-backed leather armchair, completely cloaked in the shadows, was Ryu Jihu. He hadn't gone to the symposium. He was sitting in absolute silence, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid resting loosely in his large hand. As he slowly leaned forward into the soft moonlight filtering through the glass, Zuri felt the immediate, crushing weight of his presence. He had discarded his tie and his tailored charcoal jacket. His crisp white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up past his powerful forearms. His razor-sharp, aristocratic facial features were bathed in the pale light, his strong jawline tightly clenched. But it was his eyes that anchored her. His piercing, predatory obsidian gaze locked onto her, dripping with a chilling, hyper-focused intensity. "I believe the house manager made the boundaries of this estate explicitly clear to you on your first day," Jihu spoke, his voice dangerously low, vibrating through the quiet room as he slowly stood up. He walked toward her, his towering, broad-shouldered frame moving with the silent, fluid grace of a hunter. "You do not enter the main study after midnight. You do not touch the master switch. And yet, here you are." He stopped exactly 2 inches away from her. His physical dominance was suffocating. He easily towered over her, his broad shoulders completely blocking out the view of the city skyline behind him. The air between them instantly grew thick, charged with an agonizing, electric slow-burn tension. Zuri tilted her head back, her intricate African braids shifting smoothly over her shoulders. She looked directly into his pitch-black eyes, completely defying the golden rule of his house. Her warm brown eyes blazed with an unyielding, brilliant confidence. "I am performing a critical structural diagnostic on your firewall, Mr. Ryu," Zuri replied, her voice smooth, carrying an emotionally dominant edge that refused to be intimidated by his size or his wealth. "If I don't patch the secondary ports tonight, your multi-billion-dollar mainframe will be vulnerable to another corporate infiltration by 3 a.m. I don't care about your midnight boundaries. I care about finishing my job flawlessly." A microscopic smirk tugged at the corner of Ji-Hoo's sharp lips, a rare, wicked rippling of his cold mask. He leaned down slightly, bringing his face mere inches from hers, his dark eyes tracking the flawless line of her rich melanin skin. "You think a few clever lines of code give you the right to dictate terms in my house?" Ji-Hoo murmured, his breath warm against her cheek, his deep baritone laced with a possessive, dangerous warmth. "You are a temporary employee, Miss Washington. A civilian variable in a world you do not understand. I could have you escorted to the airport before the sun rises. But you won't," Zuri countered instantly. She didn't blink. She stepped even closer into his space, her small frame radiating an intellectual power that completely matched his alpha energy. "Because we both know your elite corporate security team didn't even realize your network was hemorrhaging data 3 nights ago. You need my mind, Miss Ryu. You need me to protect this empire. So stop hiding behind your cold warnings and let me do what I was hired to do." The silence that followed was deafening. Ji-Hoo's obsidian eyes burned into hers, studying every line of her beautiful, defiant face. For 32 years, no one had ever dared to stand their ground against him. No one had ever looked him in the eye and exposed his tactical vulnerabilities with such breathtaking arrogance. He felt a sudden, feral urge to trap her here, to close the distance between them and completely shatter the professional distance she was trying to maintain. His large, calloused hand slowly rose, his fingers hovering just a millimeter away from the edge of her intricate braids, before he tightly clenched his fist and dropped his arm back to his side, forcing his dark obsession back into the shadows. "You have exactly 20 minutes to execute your patch, Miss Washington," Ji-Hoo whispered, his voice dropping into a lethal command register that sent a strange, thrilling shiver down her spine. He stepped back into the shadows, his cold composure firmly re-established, but his eyes never leaving her face. "Do not abuse my patience. If you look into my private ledger while routing that data, you will find out exactly what happens to variables who cross the line." Zuri offered him a slow, devastatingly confident smile. She opened her laptop, the pale blue light illuminating both of their faces as the first true spark of their psychological war was officially locked in. The 20 minutes of authorized network access quickly bled into 3 weeks of deep, systemic integration. Zuri's presence in the Ryu estate had become an unstated necessity. Her predictive algorithms had completely streamlined Minna's academic tracking, and her newly upgraded security protocols kept the corporate mainframes running flawlessly. But Zuri was a creature of truth. She could not ignore an anomaly. It was a torrential Tuesday afternoon, the heavy soul rain lashing violently against the panoramic glass windows of the Western Wing's private laboratory. Minna had left for an off-site university seminar, leaving Zuri alone with her custom high-performance workstation. For days, a phantom data packet had been pulsing silently through the estate's network loop every afternoon at exactly 3 p.m. It wasn't an external threat, it was coming from inside the house, deep within the forbidden sub-basement archive. Driven by a restless intellectual curiosity, Zuri traced the signal. Her fingers moved like a concert pianist across her keyboard, building a silent, invisible digital probe. She injected the probe into the estate's local network switch, using a highly sophisticated, multi-layered decryption script she had developed herself. She expected to find a hidden corporate server, or perhaps an unrecorded offshore tax shelter. Instead, the screen flickered violently. A massive, hidden root directory tore through her firewall, cascading open in a waterfall of pitch-black terminal windows. The corporate logos of Ryu Holdings vanished, replaced by an ancient, striking silver crest of a dual-headed dragon wrapping a broken crown. Zuri's breath hitched in her throat. Her warm brown eyes widened as she began to read the decrypted master files. These weren't tech logistics or shipping manifests. These were global shadow syndicate asset ledgers, dark web routing numbers, private international ports controlled by shadow fleets, and deep diplomatic immunity clauses protecting billions in untraceable shadow capital. The terrifying truth hit her all at once, shattering the safe corporate bubble she had believed in. Ryu Ji-hoo wasn't just an elite, incredibly strict billionaire CEO. He was the undisputed Iron Boss, the absolute king of the city's most feared criminal underworld syndicate. A cold sweat broke out across her rich melanin skin, her intricate braids pressing against her neck as she leaned closer to the monitor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "This can't be real," she whispered to the empty room, her hands trembling slightly as she went to shut down the connection. But her analytical mind caught a recurring string of alphanumeric code at the bottom of the syndicate's historical liquidation list. It was a file marked Atlanta Estate Seizure, 2021. With a breathless stroke of the Enter key, she forced the file open. Her mother's name appeared on the screen, followed by the precise legal deeds to her family's historic estate in Georgia. The very same predatory creditors currently trying to bankrupt her family weren't random American corporations. They were front entities owned entirely by a rival international shipping cartel. And right underneath their data log was a massive, newly executed financial injection time-stamped from 3 weeks ago, signed with the encrypted digital signature of Ryu Ji-hoo. Ji-hoo hadn't just discovered her family's financial ruin. He had weaponized his immense syndicate capital to freeze her family's debts, buying out the predatory creditors and placing her entire lineage under his private, unyielding control. He had trapped her family's legacy in his shadow network before she had even looked him in the eye. A sharp, electronic click cut through the sound of the rain. The private laboratory doors slid open automatically. Zuri froze, her fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard as the temperature in the room instantly plummeted. Standing in the doorway, a wet umbrella dripping onto the pristine hardwood floor, was Ryu Ji-hoo. He had just returned from a high-stakes corporate summit, his towering, broad-shouldered frame clad in a flawless, dark charcoal-tailored three-piece suit. His razor-sharp, aristocratic facial features were completely expressionless, a mask of absolute, terrifying serenity. But as his predatory obsidian eyes shifted from her pale face to the glowing monitor displaying his ancient syndicate crest, his composure didn't ripple. It hardened into stone. The silence between them was deafening, heavy with a profound, terrifying realization. The veil had officially dropped. She knew exactly what he was, and he knew exactly what she had discovered. The silence in the private laboratory was a living, breathing entity. The heavy rain continued to batter the glass, a chaotic backdrop to the absolute stillness holding Zuri and Ji-hoo in place. Zuri's mind, usually an efficient network of predictive logic, was a storm of raw panic and betrayal. She didn't look down. She didn't let him see her hands shake. She slowly stood up from her workstation, her intricate African braids catching the cold blue backlight of the decrypted server files. Her chin was held high, her warm brown eyes burning with a fierce, defiant terror as she looked up at the towering man blocking her only exit. "You lied to me," Zuri whispered, her voice slicing through the quiet room with an emotionally dominant intensity. "This entire job, Minna's curriculum, it was a setup. You didn't hire a tutor, Mr. Ryu. You bought an asset. You bought my family's debt so you could lock me in your cage." Ji-hoo didn't flinch. He slowly handed his wet umbrella to the house manager, who had appeared like a ghost in the corridor behind him. With a single microscopic nod, Ji-hoo dismissed his staff. The heavy laboratory doors slid closed, locking with a definitive, electronic thud. They were completely alone. The Iron Boss stepped forward, his broad shoulders casting a suffocating shadow over her. His razor-sharp features were completely smooth, but his deep obsidian eyes burned with a dark, unyielding intensity. "I have never lied to you, Zuri," Jihu spoke, his deep, gravelly baritone vibrating through the air. For the first time, he dropped the formal Miss Washington, and the sound of her name on his lips sent a sharp, confusing shiver down her spine. "Your recruitment was handled by an elite civilian agency. Your brilliance is entirely your own. But when my analysts discovered who was strangling your family's estate in Atlanta, I did what a sovereign does. I neutralized the threat." "By buying it?" Zuri countered, taking a sharp step into his space, her small frame radiating an absolute refusal to be intimidated. "You didn't neutralize anything. You just transferred the collar from their hands to yours. I want to hand in my resignation. I am leaving this estate, and I am taking my sister's family out of South Korea tonight." She moved to push past his broad frame, her shoulder brushing against the fine wool of his dark charcoal suit. In a movement so fast it blurred, Jihu's large, calloused hand shot out. He didn't hurt her. He didn't grab her skin. Instead, he placed his palm flat against the heavy timber door frame right beside her head, his towering body completely trapping her against the wall. He leaned down, his face mere inches from hers, his sharp jawline tightly clenched as his suffocating alpha energy filled the narrow space between them. The slow burn tension in the room instantly became agonizing. Zuri could feel the heat radiating from his chest, could see the dark, possessive obsession swirling in his pitch-black eyes. "You are not leaving," Jihu whispered, his voice dropping into a lethal command register that was utterly hypnotic. "You think you can just walk out into the city with the master decryption keys to a global syndicate in your head? The moment you step outside those fortified gates, my rival's predictive algorithms will flag your biometric signature. They won't use code to get the files from you, Zuri. They will use every legal, corporate, and systemic vice they possess to break you." "I can protect myself," she defied him, her breath hitching as she stared back into his predatory gaze, refusing to lower her eyes. "No, you cannot," Jihu murmured, his voice softening into a rare, raw vulnerability that caught her completely off guard. He leaned a fraction closer, his eyes tracking the line of her rich melanin skin. "You are brilliant, but you are innocent of the depth of their malice. I did not buy your debt to control you, Zuri. I bought it to take their hands off your throat. You wanted an empire where your mind is respected? You are standing in it. But as long as this storm lasts, you stay in my orbit. Under my roof. Under my protection." Zuri stared at him, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. She could see the terrifying truth of his words. She was trapped. Not by physical walls or violence, but by a high-stakes psychological web of corporate warfare and data custody. He wasn't going to let her go, not because she was his prisoner, but because he had already decided her safety was worth risking his entire empire for. The forced alliance turned the Ryu estate into a brilliant, high-tech war room. For a week, Zuri remained inside the perimeter, but she refused to be a passive observer. Instead, she locked herself in the main study alongside Jihu, combining her predictive algorithms with his global corporate intelligence to fortify his system against the inevitable backlash. But their enemies didn't launch a digital attack. They understood that to break the Iron Boss, they had to dismantle the variable he was protecting. It began on a crisp, silent Thursday morning. Zuri was analyzing an encrypted data loop when a piercing red notification overrode her personal mobile device. Her heart stopped. Her family's historical estate in Atlanta hadn't been touched by physical force. It was being liquidated by a highly coordinated, weaponized legal assault. A massive international corporate consortium, operating as a front for the rival shipping cartel, had filed an emergency injunction in federal court. Exploiting a hidden, predatory loophole buried deep within her family's old contracts, they had successfully frozen the offshore educational grant Jihu had used to protect her. Within minutes, a second notification flashed on the screen. The consortium had initiated a hostile corporate audit against Zuri herself, formally accusing her of high-level international corporate espionage. They claimed she had stolen proprietary encryption keys from her previous American employers to negotiate her astronomical salary with Riru Holdings. Zuri stood up so fast her leather chair rolled violently backward, her intricate African braids swaying as her face went entirely pale. She wasn't facing a physical threat. She was facing complete legal, financial, and professional annihilation. If these charges stuck, she would be blacklisted globally, extradited, and stripped of her family's legacy forever. The study doors slid open, and Ji-Hoo strode into the room. His towering, broad-shouldered frame was locked in rigid tension, his bespoke charcoal suit jacket unbuttoned as he moved directly toward her workstation. His razor-sharp, aristocratic features were dark, his predatory obsidian eyes flashing with a cold, lethal fury. "They bypassed our firewalls by taking the fight to the federal courts," Zuri said, her voice tight, a rare trace of vulnerability breaking through her emotionally dominant composure. She pointed at the cascading legal alerts on her screen. "They are framing me. Ji-Hoo, if the International Trade Commission flags my biometric profile under these espionage charges, your upgraded security clearance won't matter. I'll be intercepted the moment I step outside this house." Ji-Hoo stopped right beside her, his immense physical presence instantly anchoring the room. He looked down at the screens, his strong jawline tightly clenching as his alpha energy filled the space, radiating a suffocating, protective aura. "They think they can use the law to force my hand," Ji-Hoo spoke, his deep, gravelly baritone dropping into a chillingly quiet register. He turned his head slowly to look at her, his pitch-black eyes locking onto her warm brown eyes, with an unyielding intensity. "They knew I masked the funds. They are trying to back you into a corner, so I am forced to compromise my shadow network to clear your name." "Then what do we do?" Zuri asked, stepping closer into his space, her brilliant mind already calculating 100 different defensive variables. "If we fight this through standard corporate channels, it will take months. My family's estate will be liquidated by tomorrow morning." Ji-Hoo extended a large, calloused hand, his fingers resting just a millimeter above the keyboard, his warmth radiating against her skin. He looked at her with a look of absolute, burning resolve, an obsession that had completely transcended his usual cold calculation. "We don't fight through standard channels," Ji-Hoo whispered, his breath brushing against her temple as the slow burn tension between them reached a breaking point. "They want to use systemic warfare? I rule the system. Secure your master data drive, Zuri. We are about to launch a counterstrike that will tear their entire corporate infrastructure down to the bedrock." The clock on Zuri's terminal ticked ruthlessly toward 4 a.m. In the financial capitals of the West, the markets were wide open, and the legal trap designed to annihilate Zuri's life was tightening by the minute. But inside the fortified main study of the Seoul estate, Ryu Ji-Hoo was no longer playing defense. The Iron Boss stood at the head of the massive black marble conference table, his towering frame imposing and lethal. He had discarded his suit jacket and vest. His crisp white shirt sleeves rolled tightly up his forearms, revealing the raw tension in his muscles. His razor-sharp, aristocratic features were cast in a terrifyingly calm serenity. He didn't lift a weapon. He didn't order a single drop of blood to be spilled. Instead, he unleashed the devastating, untouchable social, legal, and economic power of his shadow empire solely to protect the woman he was obsessed with. Zuri sat at the primary console, her fingers flying over her custom mechanical keyboard in a seamless, lightning-fast duet with his commands. Her intricate African braids swayed as she bypassed international firewalls, feeding Ji-Hoo the precise, structural vulnerabilities of the rival cartel's front companies. The air between them was electric, thick with an intense, intoxicating slow-burn adrenaline. They weren't just a boss and a tutor anymore, they were an apex team. Two masterminds operating at the absolute peak of their power. They think their legal injunction is unassailable because it is backed by Western banking assets, Zuri stated, her warm brown eyes blazing with absolute, fierce confidence as a green data stream began to override her screens. But they left a routing vulnerability in their offshore holding company. "If we intercept their liquidity pool now, do it," Ji-Hoo commanded, his deep, gravelly baritone vibrating through the quiet room. He leaned over her shoulder, his massive chest nearly brushing her back, his suffocating alpha energy locking her in his protective orbit. "Initiate the sequence." Jihu picked up a secure, unlisted satellite phone. He didn't call foot soldiers, he called global market makers, central bank directors, and elite regulatory whistleblowers who owed their careers to his syndicate's leverage. With a few quiet, coldly delivered sentences into the receiver, Jihu executed a flawless, hyper-aggressive, hostile corporate takeover. He didn't just counter the lawsuit, he choked the entire financial life out of her enemies. On Zuri's massive monitor, the audience watching would see the staggering, real-time destruction of a global cartel. Using Zuri's predictive algorithms, Jihu systematically leaked verified, devastating fraud data regarding the rival cartel's shipping manifests to international trade regulators. Simultaneously, he flooded the market, short-selling their front stocks into a historic, unrecoverable tailspin. Within 20 breathless minutes, the predatory consortium that had dared to frame Zuri was completely humbled and broken. "Look," Zuri whispered, a breathless, triumphant smile breaking across her rich melanin skin. On the screen, the legal injunction against her family's historic estate in Atlanta vanished, completely dismissed by a panicked federal judge. The fraudulent corporate espionage charges against her were permanently purged from the international trade database, replaced by a sweeping federal investigation into the rivals who had framed her. But Jihu wasn't finished. With a final, decisive stroke on Zuri's terminal, he redirected the rival cartel's frozen liquidity. Overnight, the predatory debts hanging over her family were completely wiped out. The deeds to her family's estate legally transferred into an unassailable private trust under Zuri's sole name. The enemies who had tried to annihilate her career and her legacy were globally blacklisted, bankrupt, and professionally ruined by sunrise. The blinding golden light of the soul dawn burst through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, illuminating the room. The high-stakes economic war was won. Zuri let out a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders finally dropping as she stared at the screen in absolute awe. She had never seen a man move mountains with such quiet, terrifying efficiency. She turned around in her chair to face him. Jihu didn't step back. He stood right before her, his dark, predatory obsidian eyes wide with a profound, unmasked intensity. He had just risked billions of dollars and exposed his deepest shadow networks to the light of global regulators, all for a woman he had known for less than a month. The silence between them became agonizingly thick, the slow burn reaching an undeniable, dangerous peak as they stared at each other in the golden morning light. The high-stakes corporate chess match was over, but the intense rush of adrenaline left the room completely raw. The quiet hum of the server towers felt loud in the golden morning light, a stark contrast to the absolute digital destruction they had just executed together. Zuri sat entirely frozen in her chair, her eyes tracing the words account balance, sense, and deed status, secured on her monitor. The predatory shadow that had haunted her family for years, the weight that had kept her awake every night since her mother passed away, was simply gone. Her family's legacy was safe. She slowly stood up, her intricate African braids catching the warm sunrise. But as she tried to take a step forward, the sheer emotional exhaustion of the past month finally caught up to her. Her knees buckled slightly. Jihu moved instantly. His large, calloused hands caught her upper arms, his grip firm and steadying, preventing her from falling. His towering frame was a solid, unyielding anchor against her small, trembling body. "Zuri," he murmured, his deep baritone laced with a rare, sudden panic as he looked down at her pale face. "You're safe. It's over." But the touch broke the dam. Zuri violently pulled herself out of his grip, taking a frantic step back, her warm brown eyes wide and bright with unshed tears. The emotional dominance she had maintained so fiercely completely unraveled, shattering her walls into dust. "Don't," she breathed, her voice cracking as the first tear slipped down her rich melanin skin. "Don't touch me like you're my savior, Jihu. Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" Jihu stopped, his broad shoulders locking into a rigid stance. His razor-sharp, aristocratic features softened into a look of profound, aching vulnerability. He didn't step away. He stood there, completely exposed to her fury. "You risked everything tonight," Zuri cried, the words tearing from her throat as she gestured wildly to the screens. You risked your billions, your network, your security clearance, for me. For a tutor. You wiped out my debts, you took my family's estate, and you put it in my name. You think you made me free, but you just made me entirely dependent on a man who rules the criminal underworld. She took a ragged, breathless step toward him, her chest heaving as she looked up into his pitch-black eyes, her vulnerability laid bare. I have spent my entire life relying only on my mind, Jihu. I survived the collection agencies, I survived the corporate boardrooms, I survived losing my mother because I was the one in control. But the moment I met you, you rewrote every rule I had. You watch me from the shadows, you protect me without my permission, and tonight you proved that you can manipulate the entire world just to keep me safe. It terrifies me. Because I don't know where your protection ends and your control begins, and I don't know how to protect my heart from a man like you. The silence that followed her confession was agonizingly heavy, a thick, suffocating slow burn that stretched between them in the quiet study. Jihu looked at her, his obsidian gaze tracking the path of her tears. For 32 years, he had worn an impenetrable armor of cold calculation. He was the Iron Boss. He did not feel, he did not bleed, and he did not explain himself to anyone. But as he looked at the beautiful, brilliant woman standing before him, completely shattered by his power, his armor didn't just crack, it fell away entirely. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, completely erasing the distance between them. He didn't grab her. Instead, he slowly raised his large, powerful hands, his long fingers gently cupping her jawline, his thumbs brushing the tears from her rich skin with a breathtaking, infinite tenderness. His touch was warm, trembling with a raw emotion he had never permitted himself to feel. Then let me tell you where it begins, Zuri, Jihu whispered, his deep baritone dropping into a raw, gravelly register that vibrated straight through her chest. He leaned down, his face mere inches from hers, his dark eyes burning into her warm brown ones with an unyielding, absolute truth. I have never wanted to control you. From the first second you walked into my study and looked me in the eye without fear, you were the only variable I couldn't predict. You think I built a cage for you? Zuri, you are the only person in this world who holds the keys to mine. I didn't risk my empire tonight to make you dependent on me. I risked it because the thought of those corporate vultures suffocating your brilliant mind makes my blood turn to ice. If ruling the underworld means I have the power to keep the world from touching a single braid on your head, then I will rule it forever. I don't want your submission. I want your survival. And if it takes the rest of my life for you to trust me, then I will wait. Zuri stared up at him, her breath hitching in her throat as his words washed over her. She could feel the rapid, heavy thud of his heart beneath his crisp white dress shirt, matching her own frantic pace. The professional distance between them was entirely gone, replaced by a raw, naked intimacy that left them both completely defenseless in the morning light. The breathless intensity of their romantic breakthrough still hung heavily in the air. For a fleeting, beautiful moment, the world outside the penthouse walls did not exist. Zuri's hands remained resting gently against the crisp fabric of Jihu's white dress shirt, her heart finally finding a steady rhythm against his chest. The Iron Boss leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, letting out a rare, long overdue sigh of relief. The war was won. They were completely united. Stay here, Jihu whispered, his voice thick with a warmth he had never allowed himself to show another living soul. He gently let his hand slide from her jawline, though his eyes lingered on hers for a fraction longer. I need to sign the formal digital custody transition with the Western Trust regulators in the main study. It will take less than 5 minutes. When I return, we talk about what comes next. Together, Zuri offered him a soft, vulnerable smile, the first true smile she had ever given him. I'll be right here. Jihu turned and stepped out of the private laboratory, his broad shoulders squared as he strode down the corridor to finalize their total victory. Left alone in the quiet sunlit room, Zuri felt a strange, lingering restlessness. Her predictive mind, hardwired to always look for the next digital anomaly, couldn't just switch off. She looked back at her custom workstation. To officially close out the day's operations, she needed to run a routine, localized cleanup scan on the defeated cartel's network to ensure no residual tracking code remained attached to her family's Atlanta estate files. She sat down, her braids cascading over her shoulder as her fingers tapped a quick, automated diagnostic sequence into the terminal. The progress bar crept forward, 10%, 45%, 80%, complete a localized systemic report popped up. Everything was clean. The cartel was entirely dismantled. But as Zuri went to close the terminal, her eyes caught a tiny, blinking amber data packet buried deep within the estate's own outgoing transaction history. It was an encrypted, high-level communication timestamped from that very morning specifically, at 4:12 a.m., right in the middle of their economic war. Brows furrowed, Zuri's fingers flew across the mechanical keys, bypassing the estate's internal encryption with the master clearance keys Jihu had given her. She traced the outgoing packet's source terminal. It hadn't been sent to a bank. It hadn't been sent to a regulatory body. It was a secure, peer-to-peer data burst sent from a terminal located inside this exact house, directed straight to the secure server of the rival international shipping cartel. Zuri's blood instantly turned to ice. She opened the data packet, decrypting the raw text file. It contained the exact, unredacted corporate vulnerabilities of Ryu Holdings, the precise financial loopholes that the rival cartel had used to launch their legal attack against her family's estate. And attached to the bottom of the leak was a hidden, automated protocol that had systematically triggered the legal injunction against Zuri the moment she accessed the sub-basement archive 3 weeks ago. The entire crisis, the hostile audit, the threat of international espionage, the impending liquidation of her family's legacy, wasn't an organic attack by an outside enemy. It was a meticulously planned, beautifully executed inside job. The rival cartel hadn't masterminded the trap to break the Iron Boss. The Iron Boss had funded and fed the rivals the exact ammunition they needed to back Zuri into a corner, completely orchestration her structural ruin so he could swoop in, play the flawless savior, and force her into his private estate under 24/7 custody management. No, Zuri whispered, the word dying in her throat as the color drained entirely from her face. Her warm brown eyes stared at the screen, completely paralyzed by a profound, chilling terror. The man who had just cupped her face with infinite tenderness, the man who claimed he wanted her survival, was the architect of her absolute destruction. Click, the heavy laboratory doors slid open smoothly. Ryuji, who stepped back into the room, his flawless charcoal vest back on, carrying a crystal tray with 2 glasses of celebratory champagne. A genuine, breathtaking warmth filled his sharp, aristocratic features as he looked across the room at her. The trust is officially secure, Zuri, Jihu said, his deep, gravelly baritone smooth and triumphant. Your family's estate is entirely yours. You are finally, he stopped mid-sentence. Zuri slowly rose from her chair, turning her body to face him. Her skin was deathly pale, devoid of all the vibrant warmth she had possessed just minutes ago. Her eyes were completely stripped of trust, staring at him as if he were a monster wearing a familiar face. Without saying a word, she slowly reached out and turned the massive monitor directly toward him, illuminating the room in the harsh, red glow of the decrypted inside job ledger. Jihu's eyes shifted to the monitor. For a split second, a microscopic, icy stillness locked his jawline. His cold, impenetrable mafia composure didn't just return, it solidified into an unreadable pitch-black void. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply set the champagne tray down on the marble counter with a slow, terrifyingly calm click. Before a single word could be muttered in the suffocating silence, a sudden, high-pitched electronic chime cut through the air. It wasn't coming from the workstation. It was coming from the secure, unlisted satellite phone resting inside Jihu's discarded suit jacket on the sofa. The screen flashed a heavily encrypted, alphanumeric origin code that neither of them had ever seen before. Zuri, driven by a raw, reckless impulse of self-preservation, lunged forward and snatched the phone, slamming the speakerphone button before Jihu could stop her. The line hissed with heavy international static. Then, a cold, smooth, and chillingly familiar voice from Zuri's past cut through the speaker, delivering a single sentence that completely shattered the foundation of the room. Zuri, if you can hear this, do not trust a single file on that server, because the real Ryuji Hu died in a federal facility 5 years ago, and the man standing in front of you is the one who put him there. The audio line instantly snapped to a dead, echoing dial tone, and the terminal screen behind them abruptly flashed black.